This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, former House Speaker Joe Mavretic, political consultant Brad Crone, and syndicated columnist and author John Hood. Well, this week in Raleigh, things have been pretty quiet as our legislature has taken off for spring break. So we thought it'd be a good time to examine the year to date and evaluate the efforts of our governor, our legislature, and look at some more bills being considered by the General Assembly. This should be interesting, so let's get started. As we said in the opening rundown of the show, our legislators were away from Raleigh this past week, giving us the rare opportunity to take a macro view of where things stand in our state while evaluating the actions and results so far. I want to ask each of you, let's begin with Governor Cooper, and a Democrat having to work with a legislature overwhelmingly controlled by Republicans. I want to ask you to give your assessment of how well Governor Cooper is doing thus far. Brad Crone?
B+. I think he's getting his feet under the administration. I think he came into a situation where the transition was not amicable. I mean, they literally walked into the office, didn't have keys, they didn't have passwords for the computers. It was very awkward for them for the first 3 or 4 weeks of getting into the administration, and they immediately set out and put together a budget, sent it over to the legislature. Despite all the squabbling, Tom, between the legislature and the governor over his secretaries, all of them have been consented. They've had consent coming out of the Senate. So I think he's off to a spectacular rest of the year. I think he's laid the foundation for greatness.
John, your grade and your assessment.
Well, Brad is getting a little carried away with himself in the praise, but I agree with some of his observations. I would give Governor Cooper more like a C because, on the one hand, again, contrary to some of the predictions or assumptions about the confirmation process, it went fairly smoothly. He ended up picking cabinet secretaries who ably defended their records, explained what they were going to do. Even some of the tougher cells that people thought, like Michael Regan, to run the Department of Environmental Quality, did fine among the legislature. That was a plus. I think honestly, if people are objective about this, they will recognize that while it was good for him to resolve the House Bill 2 immediate controversy with the compromise with the legislature, he fundamentally flubbed the issue. He should have taken the deal in December. His base would have been happier with that deal in December than the deal they finally got in March. That was a mistake, and it was his mistake.
All right, Chris, your grade and your assessment.
Well, I think he's got at least a B+. It actually wasn't his mistake in December. He made a deal that the Charlotte would repeal its ordinance and the legislature would repeal HB 2. The legislature got to town and didn't repeal HB 2. So he felt like his deal was abandoned. He did get a worse deal, but that's part of what negotiating does and the way this legislative process works and the intransigence of the Republicans in the legislature, the leadership. I think I was at a speech he gave to some business folks in Cary a couple of weeks ago, and I thought he's very at ease in his role. He's talking to a business community. He's making the case for let's delay these tax cuts. We don't need to cut taxes again. I need your help to increase spending on and investments in education. I think he's off to a very good start. And the reason his cabinet secretaries flew through is that they are some of the most qualified people we've ever had appointed, especially Mandy Cohen at Department of Health and Human Services, B+, at least.
Right. Joe?
Yeah, I'd give him a C+. I've watched transition now from Hunt 2 and the Republican coming in with a Democratic General Assembly and going back to the first female ever, then a Republican with everybody behind him, and now a Democrat with a General Assembly against him. I think he was a bit slow in his cabinet appointments or recommendations. I think he's at least going around the state, which is what McCrory did not do. I think everybody on this show at one time or another said, go east, go in the middle, go west, and I think that's occurring. But on this show, many times we have said what's going to happen is there's going to be a bill passed. The governor's going to veto it, it's going to be overridden, it's going to go to the courts, and that seems to be the game that's going to go on for at least 2 or 3 more years.
And it costs the taxpayers a lot of money. Brad Crone, as we began this year, the big question was how well the governor and the Republican legislature were going to play together. 3 months in, how would you assess that?
I think they're doing very well. I think there's open dialogue between the President Pro Tem and the Speaker of the House and the leadership. I know that the governor has had numerous meetings with legislative leadership from both parties over at the Executive Mansion, and he has laid out to them sort of his legislative priorities. So I think all in all, the communication channels are there. Are there disagreements? Yes, and they're big.
We talked about one of the major accomplishments of this year was the quasi-repeal of HB 2, staring down the barrel of a deadline imposed by the NCAA. The deal was struck. I guess the criticism that Cooper has come under is the fact that he gave away too much very quickly around the table. Agree or disagree with that?
He didn't have any choice. His negotiating position was weak. They were counting on a bunch of out-of-state pressure to be lasting and forever and the most radical function. It was never going to happen that way.
Brad?
When you got Tammy Fitzgerald and Chris Grove both complaining at you, it's a good day for North Carolina.
When you got Republicans in the General Assembly who won't join 46 other states and at least let local governments protect people from discrimination, you don't have much choice. He could have gone to the people, but this would have dragged it out for 2 more years. So he is committed, however, to a statewide non-discrimination ban.
We just got out from under a mess. We're going to have another one coming.
All right, so if you were going to give the governor advice at this moment, 3 months into this, what would your advice be very quickly? Chris?
I'd say keep doing what you're doing and keep going to the people and explaining yourself. He's very, surprisingly, I think, effective when he talks to people around North Carolina.
Joe?
I think I would find some new issues.
All right. Brad?
There's nothing safe or sacred in Raleigh while the legislature's in town, so get out of town.
John?
Joe's right. Governor Cooper needs to find a couple of additional issues like the raise the age or something where he can talk about how he and the Republicans agree. That would be very good for his brand right now.
All right, so let's move over to the legislature. And I'm going to go around the table and ask each of you again to assess the achievements of this year's legislature at spring break. Give them a grade. Tell us why. Joe Mavretic?
Well, unfortunately, I think the General Assembly is returning to a mode of operations that existed in 1985, was exacerbated in 1987, and was ended in 1989. And that ending was continued well in the Assembly of 91 and 93. And I think the General Assembly is beginning to look like a weak assembly because the individual members don't seem to understand that they are not an individual. They represent 50 to 70,000 people, and each one of those votes are important. And I think what's going on in caucuses is not healthy.
So your grade?
Well, I would just say they're average.
All right. Chris?
Well, even forgetting the philosophy of budgets and everything else, which I'm really worried about, I think it's C- or a D. They spent most of this first couple months in Raleigh trying to take power away from the governor because he's a Democrat. Confirm people. They didn't think it was important to confirm Aldona Vosh, but they want to confirm Andy Cohen, Secretary of Health and Human Services. Joe's right about the process. You know, it's not an accident. This is Phil Berger's 4th term. He'll be serving 8 years as head of the state Senate. We used to talk a lot about nobody serving more than 2 terms in a row. Part of that is just a natural accumulation of power, and you stopping doing things the right way. And I think, and spending all your time on grabbing power, and I think it's a bad way to plan.
John Hood.
Go.
We're still relatively early in the legislative session in the sense that most of the actual action that may or may not happen is going to happen later. So to date, as far as legislation is concerned, I guess I would give them something like a B, simply because I think on the most important issue that has been acted on, which is HB 2, the legislature was tough. There was lots of disagreement within both caucuses about it. They ultimately passed that bill to repeal House Bill 2. That was a difficult but wise decision, and I think they get credit for that.
Brad?
I agree with John. I would give them a B on moving the House Bill 2 issue and getting a resolution that allows you back to a neutral or reset position prior to the NDO issue coming out of Charlotte. But you remember on the report cards, you always had the backside, whether or not you were talking in class.
Teacher made comments.
Teacher made
I hated
comments.
that.
The teacher made comments for me is put Speciale and Larry Pittman and the rest of the knuckle draggers in the broom closet because they're hurting your brand.
The big task they've got this session, Chris, obviously is crafting the budget. It's the Senate's turn to come out with a budget. Where are we in that process? Are they going to be able to get it out, get this budget passed by the start of the fiscal year?
Well,
I
I think we'll be fairly, a few weeks the Senate will unveil its budget. And as I said last week,
do you really think it will be a few weeks?
Of course, they're doing it all in secret. They're not worrying about what anybody thinks. They're just arguing among themselves in the corner room. And of course, they can do it as fast as they want. Now, the faster they do it in secret, the worse it is in terms of people having any input. There are reports that the Senate actually considering having no growth at all in this year's budget, which I think would be a disaster given all the needs in North Carolina. And remember, they want to cut taxes by $1 billion with a B dollars.
Well, that was my next question. The legislature's got as much as $1 billion, Joe, in available money. And Governor Cooper is proposing a 5% spending increase. The target set earlier before the session started by the Republican leadership was around 2%. Any idea where we might end up? Chris says it might not be any.
Well, first of all, for our viewers, $1 billion represents 5 percentage points of the budget. So don't get carried away with $1 billion. It's 5%. The second thing is that when you develop budgets without input from all your committee chairs and all of your members, you don't have open debate about it, you end up with flawed budgets. And I hate to see us return to that. I think it's a bad move.
All right. Well, have you signed up to receive our free weekly email newsletter Spin Cycle? It's easy to do. Just go to our website, ncspin.com, and sign up. While you're there, you can view the latest NC Spin show, get video footage and perspective pieces not seen anywhere else, and read my weekly column. Get more balanced debate for the Old North State at ncspin.com, NC Spin on YouTube, or on Twitter at NC Spin Tweets. After this break, we'll study more about the tax day and the economy at spring break.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
In 2011, our farmers asked for 6,500 seasonal workers. Only 7 Americans showed up to work those jobs. Immigrant farm workers aren't stealing American jobs. To say otherwise ignores the facts. When farmers don't have enough skilled workers, crops go unharvested and farmers lose money. Consumers face fewer choices and higher prices. This is not acceptable. Tell Congress it's time to fix our broken immigration system.
12,000 North Carolina veterans are uninsured with no options to buy health insurance. They fought for us. Now let's fight for them. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured. To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
We now return to NC Spin.
This past Tuesday was tax deadline day in our state and in the nation, and in past years, state leaders looked for what they called the April surprise, showing just how much tax revenues might have exceeded or failed to meet their expectations. Much of that depends on the overall economy in our state, and John Hood, I want to ask you, most economists are saying that the state economy is pretty healthy and we're continuing to grow, albeit not at the fast pace we saw in the 90s or even in the early years of this century. You watch the numbers pretty carefully. What's your assessment of the state economy at spring break?
It's okay, but it's not spectacular. If you look at the 3 big measures that come out at least quarterly, gross domestic product, we look pretty good. We're not in the most recent set of data. We're the 10th fastest growing economy in the country. And for the last quarter, the fastest growing economy in the South by GDP. But if you look at the job creation numbers, if you look at per capita income, we're closer to average. So the latter part of 2016, early part of 2017, a little bit weaker than we had seen recently. Now, that has happened several years. We have sort of a weak beginning of the year, and then we sort of come on strong during the summer. That may happen again.
Mixed bag, so to speak. Brad, conservatives and Republicans say that in large measure, this improved economy in North Carolina is due to the tax cuts that they've made and getting the state budget under control. The Democrats, a lot of Democrats are saying, wait a minute here. This economy is very cyclical in nature. We seem to ebb and flow over an 8 to 10 year cycle. It was going to improve anyway, as the national economy has also improved. Who's right in this argument?
Well, I think both parties have standing when it comes to the argumentation. I would submit to you, though, when history goes back and looks at the Pat McCrory years, he will be recognized for getting the ledger, the state's balance sheet, and it's large part due to the legislature and to Art Pope. But clearly, Pat McCrory provided the state the best ledger sheet we've had since Jim Hunt left office in 2001. Almost 17, 18 years. The interesting thing I'm seeing in the economy is the fuel and the fire in Mecklenburg County and in Wake County. 2,000 people a month moving into those two counties. Meanwhile, Macon and Clay and Bertie County are continuing to struggle. And you're seeing, that's the dichotomy that you're seeing in our state economy and how it's impacting the numbers to bring them down to an average level.
So even though the news might be a little bit mixed, it's certainly not mixed when we look at regions of the state from that standpoint. Joe, we talked about the cyclical nature of our state economy, and I know this is something that you've studied throughout many years. Many economists say that we're pretty far along in this economic recovery cycle. They usually have about 8 to 10 year cycles of boom and bust, so to speak. Can we expect another recessionary period sometime in the near future?
Oh, I don't think there's any question that we're going to have a recession. How soon it occurs, that's a whole different ballgame, and a lot of that depends on national issues. But one thing I would caution our viewers about, North Carolina has never in the last 40 years had an average wage, average hourly wage, or an average home wage of the national average. We have always been below the national average. So when we talk about getting better, we're not talking about getting better relative to the rest of the country. We're just trying to get to halfway, and we're not there yet.
All right, I want to switch subjects on us here. The North Carolina House has proposed the creation of a capital budget that they say will both reduce the current debt and allow for the renovation and new construction of schools, roads, and universities and community colleges improvements. The plan allocates 4% of the state budget for debt reduction and capital improvements, while also mandating that a percentage of annual budget surpluses be added to the capital budget. We've talked about having a capital budget in years past on this show. What do you think of this proposal?
Well, we used to have, as you mentioned, we used to have a capital budget, and it was reversions, a one-time leftover, whatever money was left over at the end of the year, that's what we would use on one-time expenditures. Now we've gone, and Democrats and Republicans have mixed that up and have used sometimes one-time money to pay for recurring things. So the idea is good, and I don't even think it's necessarily bad to have some percentage in mind. But remember, if one General Assembly passes this, the next General Assembly decides, oh, we want to do X, Y, and Z this year, they can just change the law and take the money out of the fund. None of this is written
not in
stone.
the Constitution.
That's right.
Yeah.
And this could dramatically change given the needs of the state next year.
Well, using this particular model, John, will this in fact achieve what the authors of it intend? Will it reduce debt and allow more money?
It certainly may. Remember that one of the things the legislature's already done is strengthen the formula regarding the state's rainy day fund. So again, this is just like with anything else. It's not in the Constitution. A future legislature could abrogate it. But I think it is very helpful to think about the capital budget as a routine expenditure rather than as, well, maybe if we find some pennies under the cushion, we'll resurface this road. We need to get into more thinking
Joe,
about
as
that.
somebody that's put budgets together before, if they pass this, won't it restrict the availability of money for the continuation and the expansion budgets?
Well, to some extent. I would change it from 4 to 5%. I'd also make sure that community colleges, counties, and the university system also set aside the money. And I would also change the law so that there would be a supermajority required to get into the fund. And I think if you did a supermajority large enough, maybe a 2/3 or a 3/5, that would kind of take care of overwhelmingly partisan General Assemblies.
North Carolina's a low-debt state, though, and what the legislature has done since 2010 was actually accelerate their bond indebtedness payments. So basically, within 2018, 2019, the only debt they're going to have on the books is what you passed in 2015, the $2 billion Connect NC bond.
Yeah, but remember about debt. Debt also has debt payoff, and there's an interest component of that could be used for roads and buildings and whatever that's going out of state.
Well, true. My final question on this is how they're saying this is going to help build public schools across the state, which traditionally are up to the individual school systems to do. How is this measure going to help school systems and local governments? Will they be grants?
Well, there are provisions to use some of the money for public schools. That apparently hard line between local and state responsibility for schools has become permeable over the years.
Absolutely, just like buses.
Yeah, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we want to talk about a new proposal for child welfare reform.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
I am Kathy Merritt, and I have worked at Cherry Hospital, a state-run psychiatric facility, for 27 years. Like 1 in 3 state employees, I still earn less than $31,000 a year because we haven't had a decent pay raise in years. When I started at 20 years old, that was a wonderful thing to have a state job. That's not the case anymore. And I love the job that I do. I just can't make it on what I do. It's not right. I work very hard. I love what I do, but it's difficult when you're not getting paid for what you do. You can't raise 2 kids on the salary that I had and not work another job and not apply for food stamps and not apply for medical benefits for your children. Tell your legislators to support a pay increase for state employees. Learn more at scenic.org.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army for me means hope.
Compassion.
Family.
Support.
One of the best parts of the show is when we ask the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's do it. Brad Crone, tell us something.
Well, 2 weeks ago, State Representative Ken Goodman introduced House Bill 737, which basically allows unaffiliated voters access to the ballot so that you don't have to have a petition process to be able to file to run for state house or state senate or county commissioner. And then it opens up our primary system. So it's a step in the right direction for voter reform.
John Hood, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, we talked earlier about the governor and his job approval according to us. According to the general public, it's about 50%. And it turns out nationally that puts Governor Cooper a little bit below the national average. The most popular governor is Charlie Baker, a Republican in Massachusetts. The least popular governor by far is Chris Christie of New Jersey.
All right. Chris Fitzsimon, tell us something we don't know.
We always talk about politics on this show and what happens in North Carolina. And just like I've mentioned with the budget, I think what happens in Washington is going to have a huge impact in North Carolina in 2018. A couple weeks ago, there was a Republican seat in the state of Kansas, a congressional seat that Donald Trump won by 27%. The Republicans had to pull all, this is the reddest, one of the reddest districts you can imagine. They had to put out all the stops, barely eked out a win. I think a lot of Republicans are nervous if Trump's approval ratings stay in the mid-30s, what happens in 2018?
Joe Mavretic, tell us something we don't know.
Yeah, I think the wrap up this time of HB2 ended at what I call a micro issue, but I think the macro issue is going to come back, and we're going to, and I think properly so, and I think we're going to focus on the effect of the BGLTQ plus cohort on population, on families, on just how the country's going to grow.
All right, we're going to take a break. Be back with some closing thoughts.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
Our state has more than 300,000 with no options for health insurance. 63% are in working families, one illness away from disaster. Let's create a North Carolina solution for covering the uninsured.
To learn more, visit careforcarolina.com.
I am Kathy Merritt, and I have worked at Cherry Hospital, a state-run psychiatric facility, for 27 years. Like 1 in 3 state employees, I still earn less than $31,000 a year because we haven't had a decent pay raise in years. When I started at 20 years old, that was a wonderful thing to have a state job. That's not the case anymore. And I love the job that I do. I just can't make it on what I do. It's not right. I work very hard. I love what I do, but it's difficult when you're not getting paid for what you do. You can't raise 2 kids on the salary that I had and not work another job and not apply for food stamps and not apply for medical benefits for your children. Tell your legislators to support a pay increase for state employees. Learn more at scenic.org.
All right, some closing thoughts around the panel. 2018's coming up. You see anything that leads you to believe there might be a change in party dominance and leadership, Chris?
Well, given the fact that historically the party that's not in power in the White House does better, given the fact that Democrats are far more enthusiastic, I think that they could easily break the supermajority in the State House and make bigger gains.
Depends on the redistricting suits and the outcome.
All right.
You got to watch the unaffiliated vote in the state. It's 28% of the total votes cast. Where they go, that party governs.
All right. John, see any change in
I
trends?
can see Democratic gains in 2018, but I don't think they'll be large.
All right. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, NCSpin on Facebook, or at Twitter at NCSpin Tweets. That's what it is. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.